Looks like we have a good group of people. I think we'll be ready to get started here. So, hi, my name is Marina. Welcome to everybody on the webinar today. Thank you for being here. We are excited to partner with our friends at the brand agency Shift Collaborative for this special webinar. The topic is Make It Sticky, the Power of Brand Aligned Visuals and Content in Digital Interfaces. This is for anyone who wants to learn how to make memorable, engaging, and reliable brand-aligned content that will help drive long-term retention in your app or whatever digital platform you're using. If you're interested and want to dive deeper into the topic, we have a post on our website at newrealm.com. We are recording the webinar, so it'll be available on our website and in the follow-up email. We encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A section for Cynthia to answer a little later on. Next slide. And before we begin, I just want to introduce New Realm really quick. We're hosting the webinar. We've been around for a while doing software development. We work with different industries, including for-profits, nonprofits, entrepreneurs, and government agencies, as well as healthcare researchers. We actually do a lot of work with researchers. We consult as early as proposal writing all the way through to the close of the study. Slide. Now to introduce Cynthia, who will be our speaker today. Cynthia Klosky is a partner and owner at Shift Collaborative, a brand agency that helps businesses and nonprofits solve design, marketing, and communications challenges. And New Realm has worked with Shift Collaborative on several projects. You'll get to see one in this presentation. Two fun facts about Cynthia. She was my professor at Point Park University, and she lives in Western Pennsylvania with many cats. And that's also something that we have in common. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cynthia.
Hi, thanks so much, Marina, and welcome everybody. Today I will be talking about a variety of things regarding engagement and making things very sticky. Quick note about the brand agency: it is, of course, not just me. There's a whole team of us, and we would be enchanted to work with anyone on making their websites and apps and other communications memorable and sticky. So the question really that we're answering today is, how can you use, in particular, brand visuals and content to make an app or website sticky? And so we'll dive in a little bit into what I mean by brand visuals and brand content, and into this idea of sticky. But what I'm referring to, at least in the course of this, well, I mean, weather-wise, all of Western Pennsylvania and perhaps the East Coast is sticky right now, but that's different from what we mean. We're really talking about things that make you want to stay engaged with something or come back to it, whether it's returning to an app to interact with it again the next day and the next day, or come back to a website to use it again or to use it as a resource. So that's what we mean by sticky, that pull and that engagement that it creates. So our sense as a brand agency is that using the full idea of brand will really help you to make something that connects and helps people engage. So among the things that using your larger brand, your visuals, your language, the whole feeling that you create, all of that together can create a strong impression, and that can create emotion in different kinds of ways, and it can then connect with the people who you're trying to work with. So the things that we talk about then are with the brand. You can always create a logo or create a set of colors, a palette, but the actual, applying it consistently and thoroughly makes a big difference. So by having sort of a coordinated set of pieces that you can use, a combination of a color scheme, the amount of space and the balance of the color, the typography, the fonts, and the other pieces that are visual that you're presenting language through, and that icons or graphics, the textures and backgrounds, all of those things working together and being used very consistently creates a feeling, and it also creates as you're doing these things consistently, you reduce what we call a cognitive load, the amount of mental energy that someone has to employ to understand what's going on in the communication that you're making. I'll show you some examples of that in a second, but you can, I think, kind of think about it yourself. Like when you arrive on a web page, for example, that feels really confusing. Why is it confusing? Are there too many places to look? Does the language change? Is the button sometimes this way and a button is sometimes that way? All of those things create tiny little questions, like micro problems that the visitor then finds themselves having to get around and solve, and that becomes really trying. And that's the cognitive load. And so by creating a coherent set of look and feel, and creating coherent language, you reduce the number of tiny little questions that people have to answer, and then you are creating a better, smoother experience. And in the course of doing that, you give them confidence. You give them confidence, yes, I know what I'm doing, I know what I should do next. And so again, the arrangement and the layout of the items on the screen can help with this. And that confidence means that they can trust that they're in good hands, that you're going to take care of them, that your app is really going to help them see what to do next, and they won't make mistakes. In many ways, this is like the opposite of a video game. I mean, you can imagine some video games where people have to search something out, and that's part of the fun of it. But when you're trying just to find some information online, you don't want to be searching, you want to be solving your problem and getting back to whatever it was that you were doing. So we're kind of doing in many ways, of course, a video game has a lot of visual consistency, but it also has this sort of set of puzzles and cognitive load that it's putting on you on purpose. And that is kind of the workout and the fun of the game. Getting back to some examples of visual consistency. And speaking of games, so a really strong and clear brand that I think appreciate partly the way that they're consistent from web to mobile device is the New York Times Games section. I imagine a number of folks here have been sucked into that, as I have. So New York Times has really extended their brand to encompass their game section, and their game section is now actually one of their more important offerings, along perhaps for some folks it's more interesting to them than news. What among the things you can see here on the I have the web page of what the game section looks like, and then on the other side I have a phone view. This is what it looks like on the phone, and you would be scrolling. And you can see that they've consistently, it seems so obvious, but they've consistently applied the look and the colors in ways that are coherent amongst themselves. And it's also very clear where are the places that I can do something. And also there's signals, where have I already done it? So you can see that I played spelling bee today. I've reached genius level. Good for me. And then I've already completed the crossword in apparently 9 minutes and 39 seconds, which is not too bad for a Wednesday, I would say. So, but you can also see that there's a very clear visual look. They've got, as you can see on the web view, you can see more of the different games that they've got, and they've got a simple style that each of them has, and little symbols on them that are consistent from one to the next. And then of course they've got ads to make some money. So, but that consistency from one to the next makes it very clear. Which are the ones that I want every day? They're in the same arrangement. I don't have to wonder about it at all. Because they've got such a clear and consistent brand that they've created for each game, once you jump into one of the games, you can see some information about it. You can see, for example, who edited it or wrote the game that day. And you can see whether you've played it or not. And so, for example, Wordle was one of their of course they've had the crossword for years and years, but the Wordle was one of the things that really brought the games, New York Times games, to greater public awareness. And so they've created a style that then they could apply to other games. And so Strands is one of their newer games. But because they already had the style for the other two, they could easily then just build and roll out the Strands game, and it feels like it's all part of a whole. And really, the New York Times is great at their overall brand and brand expansion. So they have, for example, as you can imagine, for a major publication, they have very strong identity guidelines. The URL at the bottom is from someone who I believe was involved in the development of the refresh of that brand a few years ago. And so they've got a whole guide that really talks through, and this is what we talk about when we mean a brand guide. Well, this is one of the more extreme, expanded, most complete kinds of brand guides, where it's going to cover what is the architecture, as you can see perhaps here, how are things described, what are the words that we're going to use, what order do we put them in, and then they can do some customization from there. But you can see that they have a master brand, and then they have sub brands, and the name of the publication is The New York Times. It's not New York Times, it's not NYT. Those are different abbreviations that they use in specific places. So all of this is part of their standard. And then they have variations that they've created, for example, for the web, where they then modify that so it works better, for example, on a screen, where, going back, some of those little fine points that are in their brand, if they were to try in their logo, if they were to try to use that for headlines, for example, it would be difficult to see, particularly at small resolutions. And so they've expanded their brand to allow them on the web to use a variation that works with the master brand, but then works on the web. And then similarly, they've got different sort of sub brands, and they have a family of brands that all look like they're part of the thing that go together. So this is a brand guide, and that's a very well built out, huge, massive brand guide that anyone using it would immediately be able to say, how should I design a new thing? Not all of the time, not everyone needs something that's so very built out. So here's an example of a brand guide that we created for a foundation that we worked with, the HERE Foundation. So we developed this, the brand itself, based on the message that they wanted to create and the things that they wanted to do. And then our guide includes things like how to use it, how not to use it, don't go changing the colors. All of those things I think you can understand help to create the consistency and also to reduce confusion. And then we show some applications of it. For people working in the digital world, knowing things like what are the accepted colors to use, what are the hex codes for each of them, what are the typefaces, how can I get access to them, and the licensing. Those can be really useful things to include in a brand guide as well. And then finally, like, what is the spacing, how are things arranged? Those are the kinds of things that we, if nothing else, you can put together your own guide that says this is what we're going to do consistently. So even if you don't have access to some design team that can build things for you, if you can at least be consistent in what you do create for yourself, then you've got a set of rules and principles to work from. Sometimes a brand guide exists, but then you need to build on it. Like the brand guide doesn't maybe cover, is maybe built for print, and maybe it's only, from an older world, and then you need to create digital variations or need to expand upon it for a site or an app that you're working in. So here's an example of a site where we did that, the Great Allegheny Passage. And this is, by the way, as a site that we worked on with New Realm, where we were providing some design expertise and they were providing some technological smarts, and we worked together to create this. So, I'm sorry, yay! Within this branding project, we took the logo that they had and that they had trademarked, and then needed to build on that. And so, for example, in building the site, we found that we needed a set of icons, and so we created different icons that maintained a relationship back with the original logo. So for example, this little hiker person looks a little bit like this little bicyclist person here, and they have a use of dark with light on it. Like all of those then are meant to expand upon that brand. And so once you create a set of icons like that, you can add that into your brand standards as well. So all of this is creating that strong, clear, recurring impression. And so that is that's kind of the core part of making and creating this sense of safety and consistency for your user. If you do just that much, you've already created something that they're going to remember, and that in itself is very important. So do we want to answer chat questions along the way, or do we want to wait until the end? How would you like to do this, Marina?
We can absolutely answer Q&A questions as we go, if you would like to be interrupted. And as you mentioned that, we do have a question about chat. Is chat disabled? No, it is disabled, but we do ask that you put questions in the Q&A, and we can ask them as we go along, and we will have a special time at the end that we will be answering questions. So we do have.
We'll hold on to the Q&A questions then, but I do have some good thoughts about brand guides and what to do when you don't have one. So let me roll through a few more things, and then we'll circle back to that.
Fantastic.
I think we did want to have a little bit of a poll, and it actually ties right into, I think, that question. So our question in the poll is, and Marina, perhaps you can guide folks on how to use the poll. How often do you have a brand guide or brand standard available when you're developing, for example, an app or a website?
Yes, so everyone should see a window pop up here with the question, and you can answer it. I can see the answers coming in now. Just wait a little bit for people to answer, and then I'll end the poll, and we can see what everybody said. Okay, got 100% participation. Okay. All right.
All right, so what I'm seeing here is that about a quarter of the folks, a little bit more, always have a brand guide, couldn't work without it. I think it's really hard to work without one, so I can definitely see that. Other folks are saying most of the time you do have one, and then half the people it's sometimes. So I think that the question again that someone has come in, like, what do you do when you don't have one, kind of becomes really important. I will go ahead and maybe I'll just address that question right now rather than keep everyone in suspense. Start putting together the rules that you want to use, and you can, even if you don't have a designer come in and give a whole guide to you or build a whole guide with you, I think you can find some inexpensive resources or to get a little bit of feedback and to get some design guidance. So if you can even get a couple of hours worth of consultation, you can then build your own set of rules that then are in effect a brand standard and are your brand guide. I think you'll want to make sure to cover a few things. The brand, the logo that you would need, the sort of identity of it, if you will, which might be just letters in what we call a word mark, or it might also have a graphical piece to it. You'll want to choose the fonts that you want. You can have as little as one. You might have two, where you've got one for things that are sort of more like headings or labels, and then another that's for body text. And so you'll want to think about the relative sizes of them so that you create sort of like, where do I look first? Usually people read in the Western world from top to bottom and left to right. So that helps guide the direction and the order of things. But if you want people to see something else first, and you need it to jump out, then you can use size for that as well. So those are things you might say, how are we going to handle alerts? How are we going to handle different situations? And then finally, colors, and maybe start with a smaller color palette rather than try to give yourself, it's harder to work with a whole bunch of colors. But within a color palette, you'll want to say, what is our type in? What kinds of backgrounds do we want? Do we need a couple different backgrounds? And then, for example, how do we alert people that this is a place to pay attention to, or what's a button or something that would signal getting that they can interact? And I'll talk about some interaction stuff here in a second. Those are the kinds of things that I would suggest including in a very, very basic guide that you would put together.
Okay.
All right, great. So we'll jump back into the questions in a little bit. I have already, so since we mixed that in, we'll just keep going. And so the next thing is to communicate effectively. And this is really more about sort of language, words. In most cases where you're guiding people through, for example, a website or an app, it's more important to be clear than it is to be clever. It can be fun to be clever, but not at the expense of being clear. So labels of things should say what they lead to, as opposed to making a joke or a pun, for example. I think people tend to lead into the jokes and the puns and the inside things. But again, that gets back into like the fun of a game as opposed to the clarity of a tool. So clear and simple sentences that maybe are shorter than, for example, academic writing, but use active verbs that are, so it's not, we are going to be doing, but we did, you know, or we are doing this, you know, shorter active verbs, and then simple words will be easy to understand. And then you want to make sure to present it in a way that is legible so that the fonts are not too small, that you haven't crammed things together, that there's enough space around that it doesn't feel pressured. And then finally, being consistent with your naming and your terms. So for example, let's say that this is maybe a sentence that you might start out with. For an application to become a success, it is essential to utilize clear and coherent language as well as to maintain uniform visual styling. So that sounds pretty formal. It's a little bit complicated. It's certainly a little bit long. You might transform that into second person. So instead of talking, it is essential in this sort of lofty way, you say, if you want your app to succeed, you need to do these things. And so that's more what we talk about when we mean active voice. And then finally, you can then just trim things out. Go all Hemingway on it. You know, if you want your app to succeed, write clearly and use consistent styles. And it may take several passes to go through and to make that kind of transformation, but you can see it's also taking up less space. It's going to be faster for people to process. That kind of clarity is helpful. Lots of verbs, again, academically, or maybe in someone trying to make something seem more important, that people tend to lean toward longer verbs, which actually very often tend to be Latin. They come from Latin words, you know, or from the French or from Italian, Latin languages. But if you take a look at them, you can often transform them into something that is going to be clearer, that is often going to be shorter, and is definitely going to help people really focus on what needs to happen next. And so that kind of a transformation is really helpful in clarifying what the instructions, for example, that you're putting out. In addition to having the words themselves be clear, you may you will need to make sure that they can be seen on the screen. And so, for example, the one of these over on the left with the white and the green, it looks very pretty and very often a sort of a designery kind of a look, but it is not actually going to be as readable, and some people with different visual constraints will have trouble with it. Whereas on the right, we've got a stronger blue with a lighter background, and that is something that people can read more easily. It's not always easy to know what everyone else is going to be seeing. And so let me recommend a tool here that is from Web Accessibility in Mind. That is a tool that is a contrast checker. You can put in what is the hex code of the color you're planning to use for type, for example. What's the hex code of what you're planning to use as the background color, and see if that would work. So if we were to use the white and whatever that green color is and drop that in, we would be able to see what is the contrast ratio, and then it would also give you guidance on whether that's going to be seen by many people. So this is a great tool that we use all the time. So we're communicating effectively. We've got clear words, we're making them be visual, but we're also then making sure that things are digestible and make sense together. So here, getting back to the Gap Trail site, the main menu there is all three-word cues, where to go, things to do before you go support the Gap. Really guiding people to understand this is the major set of things you can do on this particular website. And it's also very active. You know, going things, you're doing things, you're preparing and you're supporting. So it's a very active kind of a feel. And that kind of editing then, that kind of writing then helps people really know what they're capable, what the site will let them do. So we've talked about the brand consistency, and we've talked about clarity. And then how do we get people to come back? We have a lot of different tools here, and here we're getting into things that can be more challenging. If you just do the first two things, you're already well on your way. But if you're looking for further ways to enhance engagement, there are options to use interaction, to use animation. You want to make sure that it can be seen on whatever size screens people are supposed to be used on. You can sometimes personalize it, make it tailored. That may be like a phase 2 or more or later of a project. And you can gamify, you can reward people for coming back. So the interaction can be as simple as hover states on a desktop, or a sound on an app, or haptics on an app that make the device react to you. It can be as complicated as having a record of people's preferences and then changing the app to match them. But either way, you're providing some feedback and some information so people can know what's interesting to them. And then gamification is really tracking progress, and that in itself can be a reward. So let's look at some quick examples. Back here at the Gap Trail, a simple kind of engagement that we talked about is the hover states. So this menu here, this is obviously a static screenshot, but as you hover, the color and the underlining changes. And that is a subtle, almost, almost so simple cue to people that I could click here and I could go and I could do. And then when I'm in one of those sections, that state remains so that I know where I am and I can reorient myself. So that kind of hover stuff is actually very helpful to people, a helpful piece of feedback. A little farther down on the home page, we wanted to guide people into the site because there's a lot in here. And we wanted to show them some of the most, what we understood to be the most useful tools on the site. So you may have already started to plan a trip, or maybe you're figuring out, I don't even know about the Gap Trail, like what can I do? So for example, for this one, if we chose this interface where it's using the underlining and the color, we could indicate to people, this is something that you could interact with. And then if they, for example, were to click choose an activity, it drops down a menu to give them a whole set of things. And they maybe would only have thought of the Gap as a place to go bicycling or walking. And yet there are so many other ideas. And this is how we wanted to invite people to expand on that. So that this creates a little bit of a surprise and a fun while still being a kind of an interface that people can understand. And then we give them this little X and a little affordance, like a little handle to know, okay, if I click that, then I'm going to go back to where I was. So those are the kinds of things where they can be very subtle, but they create that trust that people are going to find their way through. And it can also kind of a sense of fun if you want. On the gamification side of things, literally games, that's what they're about. If you're anything like me, you can see that I am big on streaks. So my longest streak of doing the crossword every day was 170 days, not even a whole year. So clearly something I need to work on. Currently I'm at 10, so I'm not sure how many. I think I had COVID, and that's where I fell off for a little while there.
Clearly you need to work on.
But that kind of a thing, that wanting to keep your streak, is something that we know really works, and it works in habit building. I think there's this Jerry Seinfeld is very famous for saying, putting a little X on a calendar is a way to make sure you've written a joke or a line or something every day. It's a way of building a habit and being consistent. And you don't, and as he says, you don't want that streak to break. You don't want to miss that X. And it really is a strong drive for people. This is how strong it is for me. I'm very much a completist. I have to get to Queen Bee on spelling bee every day. And anyway, so I hope that you all can sympathize with this is what it's like to be me.
A
But
lot of
perhaps
people.
my point is that something like this, the idea of a streak, of getting people to come back, giving them a way to track whether they've done it or not, can help with that. And then in addition, there can be something valuable in limiting the amount of time that people can use an app. To say you've done enough, you can't keep going, you have to stop now, which counterintuitively makes them want to come back the next day and do it again. So that can be a useful tool too, to say you've spent 10 minutes or you've achieved your goal for the day, great job, we'll see you tomorrow. And that can be an interesting psychological tool that you can use to encourage engagement. Another thing that, and this is, I think, a key tool that made Wordle so successful is that you can easily share from Wordle what your score was for the day on a text. So I have a set of friends who we all share our scores, and you can see we don't even have a conversation about it most of the time. We're just sending it out. But then when I see theirs, then I go and do mine, and that kind of interaction becomes maybe a support network or you know, it just sort of feeds the fire. But it does create engagement and create return. So those are some ideas. Those are ways that you can create excitement using a brand, and then using the consistency and clarity, and then additional tools. So even, as I say, even if you just focus on the clarity of your brand, the consistency of your brand, the consistency of your language, you're most of the way there. And these other pieces then are for adding in a sense of fun, or getting people to stay longer, getting to them and to engage in different ways. If you want to take this, and we'll go through the Q&As and see what other kinds of questions, but I would start with making sure that you do have a sense of what it is that your goals are, because then you can build the brand to serve those goals, and to either create or expand on your brand guide so that you've got the consistency, you've got the things that you need. And then taking a look at your app or your website. Are you doing things consistently? Really look at it through the eyes of a user, or a person who wasn't involved in building it. Maybe having some testers come in and comment on it. And then finally, of course, New Realm and Shift are here to chat and to talk more about what ways that you can improve your design and your work.
That was wonderful. All right. Okay, so we do have some questions in the Q&A here. This is an interesting specific one from Joanna. She's asking about engagement strategies. So can you talk about how to identify when engagement strategies become stressful or burdensome? For example, we worry that someone might feel too much pressure from engagement strategies that they end up disengaging completely.
Mm-hmm. I don't have a lot of specific guides on that, but what I would be thinking about if I were you, and perhaps this is what you're already saying, is that you can see that people are disengaging and you're not sure or when or why. And follow-ups to those people might be of interest if that's permissible, and if it's not violating any of the terms and conditions, or the terms of service. Another thing that you could do, though, is to I would consider a survey or a quick reaction. And I know that certain apps will send reminders to people, and those can feel oppressive. I have an app that is supposed to remind me how to play piano, and I do find it a little annoying that it notices that I'm not practicing every day. So I do know that feeling, but then if they were to ask me, hey, is this notice helpful to you? And there was a way to react to that, that might be of interest. Um, the this, some of the things I've talked about here, like the streaks, people can really control that piece of it. So I think it's the other kinds of encouragement that you're asking about. So I'm afraid I don't have a specific answer for how to measure that it's become stressful, other than literally asking participants or testers. And this is where a testing program can be helpful. May I suggest something about testing, which is that typically for interfaces, as few as 6, it's not like a statistically significant number. It doesn't need to be hundreds or dozens of people. If you have like 6 people, 5, 6, 7 people try something, you're going to get about 80% of the kinds of feedback that you're going to get. So it's a relief to know that you could do usability testing or use testing with a smaller set of people, and you're going to cover most of the sets of answers that you would be, or issues that you might be interested in knowing. And I get that information from a web researcher whose name, of course, is escaping me right now. But if you were to Google, it's not rocket surgery. That is his website, and he has some information in there about testing that I think is really useful. And I hope that might help. So I'm not sure I answered your question exactly, but those are some thoughts I have.
I think that was very helpful and a great answer. So thank you. Okay, so we do have some other questions here. This one, I think we talked like about instruction clarity, and this question is, what is a good indication from testers that you need to rework the instructions in your app?
Well, so here is another place where I feel like usability, user testing, and it's really important to label that testing correctly. Like if you call it user testing, it can feel as though the users are being tested. And so usability testing is a better word to use. A thing that we have found helpful is live testing. It can be recorded if people are give permission for that, but to have people interact with it while someone who hasn't built the app is present, someone who doesn't have a stake in it but is a good listener and a good prompter, and going with a talk aloud, speak aloud protocol. So just gently nudging with them every now and again. Hey, what are you thinking right now? Or when you arrive on this page, what is it that you think you want to do? And so those kind of like people will very quickly start to say, well, I'm looking at this, but I don't understand what they're saying. Or if they're given a task, they're like, I can't figure it out. And again, it can take as few as 6 people, and they don't have to be people. Sometimes they need to be of a particular demographic or other group, but often it can be a neighbor or someone just in the right age range so that they've got the readability, the reading skills that are needed. But a small in-person testing where you're listening and then maybe recording so that then you can show it back to the development team and they can see, okay, now we recognize, now we see what's going on. Again, 6 people can be very inexpensive. I would recommend more frequent testing rather than larger testing groups as far as interfaces are concerned.
Very good. Okay, have a very thoughtful question about oh, okay, sorry, we have some more coming in here that I might okay. So a thoughtful question about brand guide. We have a brand guide, but it doesn't account for an icon system or other visual elements that could prove useful in engaging users. What's the best way to get buy-in from decision makers on investing and expanding the brand assets for our app?
Sure. It's great to have icons and wayfinding tools that can enhance or even break up text, break up blocks of text, or give people, when I say wayfinding, it acts like signage that lets people know, am I a signpost, am I in the right place? And so if you're having trouble showing that to stakeholders, it can be useful to do fast mock-ups. These can be on paper even, where you do a similar kind of a testing and and again, six users is plenty. You could then be able to measure the effectiveness of with and without, and then show that to the stakeholders. And that kind of, proving it without, getting into ideological arguments, and being able to show that the cost is reasonable. Those can be good options. There are a lot of good icon sets that are out there, so it's not that you necessarily need to have a custom design set. There are a lot of good ones. You may want to take a good set and then maybe only have to enhance it with a few custom pieces that fit your particular application. So there's also ways of thinking about how to keep the cost, within budget that way.
You're good. Now, I think that you answered this question earlier in the presentation, but let's see if you maybe have anything else that you'd like to add. But it's what are some key components included in a standards document that I'll need when developing or designing my website or app?
So I'm just going to visually give you guys give people something to look at, so it's not just our faces. And this simple guide that we had here, I really would focus on making sure you have a set color palette, and maybe even beyond what's here, which are the main colors to use, and maybe notes on when they get used. That would be helpful too, like never using this color, for example, as a background, because that's going to be a really hard one to get a good contrast with type, but it can be good for making something jump out or used in a limited way. So the color palette and when you would use each of them, the typefaces and when they're used, and proper ways of using the logo, when to use a variant of the logo, and how small it's allowed to be. Like, those are the kinds of things that I think would be useful. From there, going on to, this is what we use for headings, this is what we use for body, this is a decorative element that gets used here, and just notes. And if you can mock that up on Canva or any graphical tool and add your notes in there, that is, you've done it. Now you've made a brand guide. You can add that to your LinkedIn.
Great. If you have any questions, please continue putting them in the queue. But I might, Cynthia, if you don't have anything else to add, I might start to wrap up here.
I only
Anything
to share and you've got all the connection information, but just say, make it very clear. I'd be happy for people to send an email and get in touch, or find me on LinkedIn, because I am there too.
Yes, if you would like to partner with Shift Collaborative and New Realm on a project, be sure to reach out. You can also reach out at New Realm at it. Sorry, I wouldn't repeat myself. info@newrealm.com. So again, it was a really great discussion, Cynthia. I appreciate you for doing this. Thanks for all the questions. There's a survey at the end that will pop up, and the recording of this will be sent out. So, thanks everybody for being here, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.